Mark Gerarda and Jener Cox first met in a cozy little cafe back in 1986. As soon as the young man entered the establishment, he immediately noticed the charming waitress who amazed him with her beauty. The girl's blue eyes and sincere smile were forever etched in Mark's memory. "I was so captivated by her appearance that I was momentarily speechless," he later recalled. However, due to his excessive shyness, Mark never mustered up the courage to speak to the girl that day. Fate brought them together again only 4 years later. As it turned out, they both worked in the same business center in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Mark began visiting Jener at work more frequently, but he could never gather his thoughts to ask her out on a date. The girl was the complete opposite of Mark, confident and straightforward. That's why one day she approached him herself and said, "Hey, so when are you finally going to ask me out?" This phrase marked the beginning of their passionate romance, which led them to the altar 3 years later in October 1993. At that time, Mark was 25 years old and Jener was 23. Like most young couples, they didn't think about whether they were destined to spend the rest of their lives together. And indeed, the first 15 years of their married life passed peacefully and harmoniously. But in 2008, the global financial crisis brought about changes. This crisis forced us to rethink many things, Mark shared. They both lost their jobs and faced a constant lack of funds, which led to frequent quarrels. Despite the fact that both Mark and Jener took on any work they could find, they simply couldn't return to the usual standard of living they had enjoyed for many years. In November 2011, the couple decided to move to Greenwell, South Carolina, where each of them found a new job. Mark got a position as a marketing specialist, while Jener became a sales manager. The change of scenery did them good, they grew close again. The husband recalled that frequent walks along picturesque mountain trails and joint vacations on the coast added a touch of romance to their relationship. However, this idyll did not last long. In 2017, 6 years after the move, problems arose in the Gerards' family once again. Jener was suddenly fired from her job and couldn't find a new position for a long time. This dealt a heavy blow to her self-esteem. The woman lost confidence in herself and became a mere shadow of the Jener she had always been. Mark didn't tell anyone, but deep down he was disappointed that his wife had given up for the first time in her life and couldn't cope with the difficulties. That's when the man decided to take matters into his own hands and started looking for work in another state, hoping that a change of scenery would breathe new life into their fading relationship. Soon he came across a vacancy for a creative director in the marketing department at the University of Delaware and sent in his resume. To Mark's surprise, he very quickly received a response from Meredith Chapman, a 33-year-old woman who was to become his direct supervisor if he successfully passed the interview. "We were very interested in your resume and would be happy to meet with you next Thursday," the letter said. Mark couldn't pass up such an opportunity and headed to Delaware. The interview lasted about an hour, and the young woman, without waiting for approval from senior management, informed him that he was hired. It was obvious that Meredith was interested in Mark not only as a professional, but also as a man. Despite her young age, Meredith had made a stunning career, becoming a senior marketing director at the age of 31. She was born in Pennsylvania in 1984, graduated from the University of Delaware, and earned a master's degree in public relations. At that time, Meredith was married to a man named Luke Chapman, a former member of the New Hartford City Council in New Jersey. The couple got married in 2009 and lived in the Fairfield Crest area of Delaware. Like the Gerards, they had no children. Mark immediately felt that his new boss was showing interest in him that went beyond the professional. "She was so charismatic, full of energy and passionate about her work that I simply couldn't take my eyes off her. Young, attractive, smart. Just a few minutes into our conversation, I said, 'I want to work with you,'" he later recalled. Upon returning to Greenwell, Mark enthusiastically began persuading his wife to move to Delaware. Jener, who was still depressed, did not immediately understand the reason for her husband's elated mood. However, without thinking twice, she agreed. In November 2017, Mark moved to Wilmington, while Jener stayed in Greenwell to rent out their house and settle some affairs. The 40-year-old Mark was thrilled about moving north and especially about the prospect of working with Meredith. Mark probably realized himself that his move to Delaware was the beginning of the end of his marriage to Jener. For the first month and a half, he lived alone in the new state and during this time managed to get to know Meredith well. It turned out that they had a lot in common. Once, when Luke Chapman was not at home, Meredith invited Mark over for a drink. Recalling that night, the man said that it was surprisingly easy to communicate with his boss. The hours flew by unnoticed, and Mark told Meredith about his problems, the loss of his parents and brother, his wife who had lost interest in life. "I was completely confused," Mark confessed. "On the one hand, I had been married to Jener for a quarter of a century, and on the whole we were happy. But on the other hand, next to Meredith I felt 20 years younger. She was an extraordinary woman. I don't know how it happened, but in early December 2017 I was already asking her out on a date." Unlike Jener, Meredith constantly told Mark what a wonderful specialist and person he was. His wife complimented him so rarely that such attention from Meredith made a huge impression on him. Just a month after they met, they went on a date to a restaurant where they kissed for the first time. Mark later admitted that he felt terrible for betraying his wife. He tried to convince Meredith that they should stop before it was too late. But she confessed that she had been living in an unhappy marriage for 9 years, and life was too short to spend it on those who do not value love. Mark couldn't help but agree with this argument and let his feelings take over. By the time Jener finally moved to her husband in Delaware, he and Meredith had already secretly met several times. So the woman immediately noticed changes in Mark's behavior. Despite her feigned callousness, Jener was very insightful and quickly guessed that her husband had a mistress. She was not going to remain silent and decided to directly tell Mark about her suspicions. The man denied everything, but this only finally convinced his wife of his infidelity. Jener was not 100% sure, so she hired a private detective to follow Mark and find out the name of his lover. Shortly before Valentine's Day in 2018, Jener finally received irrefutable evidence of her husband's infidelity, photographs and screenshots of correspondence with Meredith Chapman. She told Mark that she knew more than enough about his escapades. Seeing the evidence, the man realized that there was no point in denying it further, and confessed, "Yes, I met with Meredith a few times, but it's just an affair, nothing more." Jener was devastated by the betrayal, but found the strength to sit down with Mark at the negotiating table and discuss the situation. They agreed to try to save their marriage and start seeing a family psychotherapist. The first session was encouraging, but when Mark was getting ready for the second one, something unexpected happened. As he was putting on his jacket, he noticed something rectangular sticking out from under the lining. At first, he thought it was an anti-theft tag, but when he tore the lining, he found a voice recorder. Mark was furious and demanded an explanation from Jener. She calmly replied that she wanted to make sure he had really stopped seeing Meredith, as she still had doubts. The Gerards' marriage was falling apart at the seams. At the end of February 2018, Mark told Jener that he would file for divorce in 2 months. This delay was due to the peculiarities of Delaware law, but they would have to live under the same roof. Meanwhile, Meredith Chapman also initiated divorce proceedings with her husband Luke, informing him that she was leaving him for another man. Moreover, she began looking for a new job in order to move and start a life with Mark elsewhere. In early March, Meredith was offered the position of assistant vice president at the University of Pennsylvania. She joyfully informed Mark about this, and they, no longer hiding, began planning their joint move. While Meredith and Mark's relationship developed, Jener began seeing psychologist Sheila Brennan. As the woman would later tell the police, resentment was growing inside her that her husband had traded her for a younger lover. But no matter how much the psychologist tried to help Jener, she only sank deeper into an emotional abyss. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Jener could not find a new job, and this really scared her. It seemed that with each passing day, things were getting worse and worse. In desperation, the woman even threatened Mark that she would take her own life if he did not change his mind about getting divorced. These words alarmed the man, so when Jener gave him a list of things they had to do together before parting ways, he agreed. Mark thought that this way he would help his wife come to terms with the inevitable divorce, but in fact she was desperately clinging to any opportunity to win him back. Jener believed that if they completed everything on the list, went to a restaurant, to the movies, spent an evening on the beach, they would be able to restore their relationship. Mark sincerely tried to help Jener end their marriage with dignity, but in doing so he only gave her false hope for a future together. Gradually completing the items on the list, the woman began posting old photos of them together on social media with optimistic captions like, "Any difficulties can be overcome. We have been through so much together, betrayal, depression, trauma, distrust, but now we are finally on the right track." When Mark saw these posts on his wife's page in early April, he was stunned. He realized that he had to tell Jener frankly, they had no future together and could not have one. In response, she silently got up and left the room. The man thought that he had finally clarified everything, but he did not take one thing into account: hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. On the evening of April 23, 2018, Mark and Meredith agreed to have dinner together and then go to the house she had recently rented near her new place of work. When Meredith, which was completely unlike her, was very late, Mark received a message from his wife, "She won't come." And a minute later another one, "You've ruined my life, Mark. I hope you'll never be happy. Goodbye." At first, he took it as a bad joke. Mark rushed to call his wife and then his mistress, but neither of them answered. Then the man grabbed his car keys and sped off to Meredith's house. What he saw inside was forever etched in his memory. Meredith was lying at the entrance to the living room, and opposite her was Jener with a gun in her hand. Mark immediately called an ambulance, hoping to save both women, but the medics who arrived at the scene pronounced both his ex-wife and his new lover dead. As it turned out later, Jener had purchased the weapon back on March 20th, but used it only after exhausting all possibilities of winning her husband back. Judging by the statement from her credit card, before appearing at Meredith's house, she had been to the shooting range 3 times, practicing her shooting. According to official data, Jener broke into the house through a window while the owner was at work and waited for her for several hours. As soon as Meredith crossed the threshold, shots rang out. In the farewell letter that Mark later found in his email, Jener blamed him for the tragedy, as his betrayal had left her no choice and forced her to take such a desperate step. Several years passed, and Mark Gerarda began giving interviews, promoting his book, Irreparable: 3 Lives, 2 Deaths, 1 Story Worth Telling. He admitted that if he could turn back time, he would have acted completely differently. "I broke her heart and I deeply regret making her believe that she had no other way out. I didn't want to hurt her, because I loved her then and I still love her now. If only I could change everything." And although Mark claims that he wrote the book so that others would not repeat his mistakes, many doubt his sincerity and accuse him of trying to profit from the tragedy. He denies this and claims that all royalties from sales will go to charity, to help people in difficult life circumstances. Currently, Mark continues to work in the advertising field and, according to him, enjoys a solitary life in the company of 2 dogs that he and Jener once got together. Recently, a friend told me that he feels very sorry for me because I am lonely. And I replied, "Yes, I live alone, but I don't feel lonely at all. I never dine alone, I never buy clothes for myself. To be honest, I have a great time alone. I think the main thing is to learn to listen to yourself and live in harmony with yourself. Then the company of others will become not a necessity, but a pleasant bonus." I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.